And I'd just like to acknowledge that I speak on unceded Aboriginal land, the land of the Cammeraygal people of the Eora Nation. And I'd like to pay my respects to the elders, past, present and emerging, and also to any Aboriginal people who may be watching this at some time. So, and good evening to all of you. Tonight's topic is relationships, and how to create healing, fulfilling, lasting relationships. And I would consider relationships to be one of the most important things in my life. And I think I could safely say that that would apply to everyone. Because the soul is not, once the soul takes a body, we can't live in isolation. We are interdependent beings, and relationships are a very, very important part of our existence. Without being in relationship, we really wouldn't have much of an idea of who we are, because our relationships reflect us, back to us. They're a mirror for us. And without relationships, it would be very difficult to grow personally or emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. And so relationships are so much forming the fabric of our lives that I wanted to speak in some depth tonight about what it is. What are the keys to good relationships? And I'm going to come tonight from the lens of intimacy, because intimacy is said to be our deepest drive, our deepest human drive is for intimacy with other, whoever other may be. And what intimacy involves is having the ability to be completely myself in the presence of another, and to be comfortable and non-judgmental about myself, warts and all. And so in understanding, intimacy is what makes relationships sing, I would say. It's the magic that we search for and that we long for, and that absolutely real contact with another. And that other can be God, you know. Human beings particularly as well, because we're in a body and our lives, you know, we have family, they're the first people we relate to, and then that social network grows as we become older and more independent. And so intimacy, despite the fact that we are so deeply driven to need and desire intimacy, it is also very, very, in a body conscious stage, intimacy can be very scary for many people, particularly depending on their upbringing. And so in talking about how we gain intimacy, sorry, my computer has become, lost its power cord. I'll just put it back in. So as much as we want this deep and real contact with another, we also, many people discover many ways of not having that intimacy because they are scared of it. There is quite a lot of fear around feeling vulnerable and exposed, being judged, not being accepted, being rejected. And so early experiences in life can play out, very powerfully in our relationships as we grow up. And so I want to address this. I want to name these ways that we prevent or defend against having real contact with another, because what I'm aware of, I can change. And what I'm not aware of, I can never change. And so we would say that people who are not in having a real and deep connection with one another are usually playing what we call games. And so I'll talk about the most common of these games. Obviously, when it comes to individual relationships, especially one-on-one relationships, but of course I'm not just talking about love relationships. I'm talking about all relationships, regardless of who they are with. Could be family, could be friends, could be colleagues, work colleagues, and it could be a one-on-one love relationship. So the fear of intimacy can give rise to tension. And we will see that the closer the relationship, if there is fear of intimacy, then the closer that relationship, then the greater will be the need for tension relief. And so one of the most common games that people play, this is particularly so in one-on-one love relationships, but this can happen in all relationships. It's called the distancing pursuing game. And so what two people will do if they are feeling confronted? One of them feels particularly confronted because the other one is coming a little too close for comfort by that person's standards and experience, which may not be particularly close at all, but what they will do is distance that person and push them away or back off somewhat to relieve the tension until they find a distance that they're comfortable with. And then what may happen is that the person who is being distanced will move in closer again, which will cause the distancer to distance even more, to distance again and back off further. And this could happen a number of times, and then the person who's pursuing gives up and they back off. They get fed up and they back off. And then the person who was doing the distancing originally then needs to close the gap because they're worried about being abandoned by that person or being rejected. So then they will start to close the gap themselves. So they will start pursuing. And the original pursuer will then start distancing. This game is so popular. It's a very, very common game in relationship. And I want to just really clarify what a healthy relationship involves. Because a healthy relationship will happen between two people. Here they are, two people. And so two people will come together, have a beautiful experience of intimacy, and then they will pull apart and integrate that experience of closeness and intimacy. And then when they feel they've done that integration, then they'll come back together again. And this is what people do in healthy relationships. Because a healthy relationship is like breathing. You know, it's this, we come together and then we become separate again, and we integrate that experience of being together. We do our thing and then come back for that lovely and wonderful and enjoyable, warm experience of intimacy again. And both of these movements are necessary, because what happens if people come together and they experience some closeness, perhaps they're not at the intimacy level, really, and there's fear about being abandoned or rejected or losing the other, then there will be this sort of relationship that we call enmeshed or fused. And so people get into this sort of relationship, and if the other one wants to pull away, the other one will cling on very tightly and get really triggered. Their abandonment stuff or their rejection stuff will get very triggered. And this can cause a lot of dysfunction in the relationship. And so there are relationships that used to, in the 80s, the coin got termed, this was in America, where I used to live, codependent relationships, which is this sort of situation as opposed to this sort of situation. And so, second game that people play, well, first of all, let me say that with a distancing and pursuing game, the only way for people to break that pattern, and it is a very common pattern. So the way to break that pattern is for both people to understand what they're doing, for it to be named and expressed, and for them to, when one person wants to distance or one person wants to pursue the other, what they need to do is have a very honest talk to one another and say, I feel like I want to pursue you right now. what I'm feeling is you know, I have this feeling of fear of rejection, and you know, it's from early in my life because my mum or my dad rejected me, and I'm really afraid that you're going to reject me. And then, you know, a real conversation can begin about these when people start talking about their fears and their feelings. And this sort of conversation is a really important step towards intimacy, because intimacy is about telling the truth to your partner or your friend or whoever it is. You know, there are people who, when they get a job, they're terrified of getting fired. And so they will go into all kinds of people-pleasing behaviours, as will people who are afraid of not being liked. You know, they become monumental people pleasers, constantly seeking approval and praise, and can work very, very, very hard for that. And but what they do is disconnect from their true self, because these are maladaptive behaviours in order to get a particular need met. And so the next, and so the challenge for the distancing and pursuing couple of people is that they need to stop distancing and pursuing and talk about what's really going on. And then they will be making substantive steps towards intimacy. And so then the next game we have is triangulation. And the game of triangulation is when a third person is brought in to a two-person relationship. And that third person will be used to relieve tension. So one person will talk to the third person about the other person and give themselves some tension relief by doing that. And this can lead to, once third person is triangulated into a relationship, a couple may do this, they may both speak to that third person about the other. And three can feel more stable than two. However, triangulation can lead to distancer pursuer patterns. And in triangulation can also lead to rescuing. The third person will rescue one person who feels they're the victim, and then the victim may turn on the other person. And so we'll get this three-way system happening where we have a victim, a rescuer, and someone that I'm going to call a perpetrator. That word may be a bit strong. And this again is a very unhealthy pattern, because if two people are experiencing discomfort or in their relationship, then they need to speak directly about that rather than using another person to to speak to and say to that third person what they should be saying to the other person. And so again, what needs to happen here is that the rescuing person can become caring, that the more person who's in the victim, perhaps the victim stance, needs to become more assertive, and that the person who is in the more the pursuing or perpetrating side part of the triangle may need to really listen. So whatever is going on here, there needs to be good, honest communication and boundaries put in place. Then there are people who need to need and others who need to be needed. And so this dynamic playing out in a relationship can also be very difficult, because the person who needs to need or needs to be needed, if the person with whom they're in relationship does not need them anymore or at all, then they may feel rejected or devalued. So there are people who need to need, and there are people who need to be needed. And there are people who need not to need, and there are people who need not to be needed. And the reality is that in a relationship, particularly a long-term relationship, at some point, one or another of these dynamics can play out, depending on people's life situations and what's happening. So someone may be needing some support from their friend or their partner or their relative, or their colleague if something's going on at work. And so this is another game that can play out, and it's not uncommon. People in the often in the helping professions can fall quite easily into this category of enjoying being needed, because they're in a helping role for very much of their time, much of their life. And so they're used to being needed, and they can derive a great deal of fulfillment from being needed. It's not uncommon in the helping professions and the human service areas of work. And so there's another game that we call fixing and rescuing. And fixing and rescuing is, again, a situation that arises when people have no boundaries. In a healthy relationship, we respect another person's boundaries, and that they are possibly the best person to find their own solutions And as a friend or a companion or a colleague or a family member or a partner, you know, I can really support that person in finding their own solutions if they ask me to. If they ask. If they do not ask, then it is not going to be appropriate to jump in and start helping, because people need help. They're perfectly capable of asking for it. And it can be quite annoying to be fixed when you simply want somebody to listen to you and give some empathic support, some empathic reflection. And so fixing and rescuing in a situation where someone may be in quite a difficult situation, they may be in dire straits, and they're really, really trying to work their way through that situation and, you know, find a pathway through. It can be very demeaning to that person who may be arming themselves with knowledge and the right kind of support for some well-meaning friend or family member or colleague to turn around and say, oh, you need to do this. I know what you need this. And so fixing and rescuing really is not appreciated in most instances. It is what is a healthy solution if you're with someone who is going through difficulties. You may have been through a similar situation yourself. And so what can be very appropriate is to say, yeah, look, you know, I've been through a similar situation and I would never dream of telling you what to do but this is what I did and it worked. Or this is what I did and it really did not work. And I know that you know, are uniquely gifted to find your own solution in this situation. And I really feel for you because I know how difficult it was for me when I went through that similar situation. So that is a much more appropriate way of supporting someone who's going through difficulties. If someone directly asks for help, if they say, look, can you help me? What would be really helpful to me at the moment is X, Y, Z. And you can say, look, I can. This is what I can do. Would that be helpful to you? Or you might say, no, I can't do X, Y, and Z, but I could do this. And I realise that's not what you were thinking, but would that be of any use to you? And so we just need to realise that other people are different to us, that we are all separate, unique individuals, and what works for one doesn't necessarily work for another because we are different. And I may think that person's situation is the same as a situation I was in last year or similar to. However, they may feel differently. And so I do need to be very respectful of my friend or my colleague or whoever it is. And so some people experience an inability to deal with vulnerability in themselves. They hate feeling vulnerable. And similarly, they have an inability to deal with another person who's being very vulnerable with them. And so what they may do is shut that other person down and run away or find some way of shutting them down. And that usually is because they can't deal with their own vulnerability. If they shut down someone who's being vulnerable, it's because they can't deal with their own vulnerability or something's come up. And what gets triggered here is, and this is a whole big subject, is our what we call attachment system. Now, attachment is something that we form with our primary carers as an infant. And this our attachment system, the blueprint for this is laid in our infancy from very, very early, really from when we come out of the womb. And for the first year or two, the relationship that we have with our mum or our dad or our primary caregiver, whoever that may be, will become the blueprint for our attachments through life. And if we experience a healthy attachment to our primary caregiver, and we experience someone who is really there for us, who is able to interpret what it is we need or want when we're crying or fussy or agitated, and who is there for us and is able to interpret and intuit and meet our needs, then we develop a feeling of safety and security with that person, and we attach in a very healthy way to that person. And provided those attachment needs continue to be met during our early life, this is a foundation for us to form healthy relationships throughout the rest of our life. And so when someone is unable to deal with their own or another's vulnerability, there is a reason for that. And there can be many reasons. And, you know, I don't want to jump on one thing here because a lot of things different, this can be quite a complex thing that's going on for the person who can't deal with vulnerability. And that will, of course, always result in issues of uncomfortability with intimacy and possibly closeness. Even just closeness and intimacy are not the same thing. We can feel close to someone and get a nice warm feeling with them, but that does not necessarily mean that we are engaging in an intimate relationship. Yes, it is a nice precursor to intimacy, but intimacy does involve a much greater degree of evolution, of personal of my personal evolution, having a healthy attachment system is a wonderful precursor for developing very good intimacy skills. Because I will have experienced a good intimacy with my primary caregiver. And communication will therefore be honest. If I just examine the level of my communication with others, any day of the week, if you just reflect on how your communication is with others, are you just being sort of polite or making jokes or offering some pleasantries that are fairly meaningless? Or are you having a much more real conversation? It might be with a colleague at work that you meet in passing at the coffee machine, and you can have a real conversation, or you could just be quite polite and very distant and so on. So I can look at my own style, relationship style. We all have a relationship style, every single one of us. And so I need to become aware of my relationship style. How am I? What is my way of being with other people, regardless of who those people are? And, how much I see of them or how close I am to them. So what I'm aware of, I can change. What I'm not aware of, I can never change. And so developing a high level of self-awareness and being aware of how I am with others and how they respond to how I am with them is very, very important. I'm a person who I can do small talk, but I don't practice it at any great length. I find it quite boring. And because I'm very curious about people, I like to get to know people in a much deeper way. And so you won't find me getting into small talk very much, if at all. And so I would say it's really good to reflect on your own relationship style. I'm going to talk about attachment separately. There'll be a session on its own. But our attachment style plays out very much in all of our relationships. And the way we communicate can be very telling about our attachment style and about the kinds of relationships we want to have. Someone may say, really want to be in a relationship with you. I just think you're so fabulous. And I love all these things about you. But then when those steps are taken towards a more intimate relationship, you might be thinking, well, what happened to them? Where did they go? And they may want intimacy. They may seek and want intimacy. But then what clicks in is that they don't have any intimacy tolerance. And so as much as they may seek and feel a drive for having an intimate relationship with someone, once that possibility arises, that the other person is willing and approaches them, then there isn't that capacity for intimacy or that ability to tolerate. And so things will get to a certain point, and then that person who lacks intimacy tolerance, despite what they may say, their words and their actions could be very, very opposite. And so what I would say is observe the actions as well as listen to the words, because the words could be very, very deceiving. That person may not even understand themselves what is happening. And so what is needed is to be very, very, very honest. In my encounters with other people. If I am honest about what I'm feeling, that is an incredible skill to have. It's an intimacy skill. And for instance, to be able to say, I just feel I really want to get close to you because, you know, I think you're fantastic and I love all these qualities in you. But when I start to feel the distance between us narrow, I get scared and I don't know I want to run away and I don't know what this is about. And then I need to sort of back off and to be able to be honest like that means that there's a conversation that can happen here. And it's an important conversation to have because it's a conversation that will lead into intimacy. And, you know, then the other person, well, they may not really understand, but at one level they can understand that that person is feeling uncomfortable at this level of closeness, and can then make a decision about that, whether they want to be in that association or that relationship at all. You know, and we can look at patterns in our relationships and in our lives. Reviewing our relationship patterns. If someone comes to me and says, look, I have this pattern where I fall in love or I get really close to someone and then they dump me. They reject me. And, you know, then I get abandoned and all my abandonment issues come up. You know, this is stuff for therapy. It really is. This sort of scenario, a trained professional does need to come and to be invited in to assist with the appropriate and trained professional support here to help that person work through those issues. But nonetheless, being honest, being very honest, if there is a pattern, a relationship pattern where I keep getting abandoned, you know, I meet this soulmate or this fabulous friend or whoever, and you know, we want to take it somewhere and then it all falls apart and there's this pattern that's been happening throughout life, throughout adult life, or sometimes through childhood too, then there are definitely childhood issues here, and there are definitely attachment issues here. So with probably on both sides. And because we tend to attract others who have maladaptive issues as we do. You know, if we're consistently unable to form healthy attachments and relationships that last, then things are not right, you know, for me, for the other person. And so I do need some professional help, but there will be definitely, this will go back to childhood and to the issues I had with my primary caregivers or caregiver, if it was a single parent or a single caregiver. And so I'll leave it there for the moment because we're going to have some meditation. But are there any questions at this point? Okay, I can't see either of you. I can't see you and I can't hear you. So I'm going to assume that there are no questions. But what we're going to do now is actually have some meditation to conclude tonight's session on relationships. And next week will be part 2 of relationships. And just to recap what I have spoken about tonight is that having healthy relationships means staying out of games. Direct, honest communication is paramount if a relationship is to grow and be a good relationship. And this requires a strong commitment to truth-telling. That does not mean I I sacrifice diplomacy. Diplomacy, I believe, is very important. Empathy, compassion, diplomacy, these are all very important relationship skills. And so many people lie a lot of the time. It's really good to observe. Just reflect on a day in your life and see how many times you've told the truth and how many times you've lied. How honest you have been with yourself and with others. Because this is key. Self-awareness is key to having good relationships. Okay, so I'll leave you with those thoughts and Om Shanti, and we'll just now stay and have a few minutes silence of meditation. So I allow my thoughts to recede. And take a deep breath. Into my mind. And into my body. And allow those deep breaths to resonate through my being as I let go of my thoughts. And move into that subtle place inside. Into the stillness and the peace. And the silence. And I feel the pulsation of energy in this beautiful place of peace. To the river of love. I flow with the energy. It's beautiful heart energy. That opens up and expands into the unlimited. And I feel drawn by the magnet of love. I feel the presence of the divine surround me and fill me. And I surrender completely. To this one, and this one surrenders to me. And a magical, silent union of bliss. Joy beyond the senses. The endless, unlimited love. This is the one that I have longed for. this love is true love that I have longed for so long. Here, filling me with me. Om Shanti. Thank you for being here tonight. And if you have any questions about relationships that come up for you, please just let me know through the AVC, and we can discuss those next week. So, Om Shanti, and have a wonderful week. Good night.